patiently in the waiting room. And welcome to our ReSAKSS webinar. As you stream in, please make yourself at home. Head to the chat and tell us your name, your organization, and where you are joining from. My name is Layi Butake. I'm the Director of Communication and Outreach for Academia 2063, and I am joining you from Dakar, Senegal. Delighted to be your MC for the occasion. So this webinar has been convened by Academia 2063 to provide a platform to discuss the findings of the 16th edition of the ReSAKSS Annual Trends and Outlook Report, themed Advancing the Climate and Bioeconomy Agenda in Africa for Resilient and Sustainable Agri-Food Systems. And we are looking forward to a very engaging conversation with you. This flagship publication was unveiled last month in Rabat, Morocco, where Academia 2063 and the African Union Commission's Department of Agriculture, Rural Development, Blue Economy and Sustainable Environment, in partnership with the Policy Center for the New South, hosted the 2024 ReSAKSS Annual Conference. And during that conference, state and non-state actors came together around high-level side events and plenary conversations to unpack the findings and policy recommendations from the ReSAKSS Annual Trends and Outlook Report. As most of you may know, the Annual Trends and Outlook Report, which is produced by ReSAKSS, is the official monitoring and evaluation report for the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, the CAADP. So this conversation is very timely and relevant, especially in the context of the post-Malabo agenda for action on CAADP. Today, we will exchange with researchers and experts from various organizations, some of whom were contributors to this report, and we are looking forward to a highly engaging discussion with you. We invite you, as always, to head to the Q&A chat. You can see it at the bottom of your screen, and drop any comments or contributions that you might have as we progress with this conversation. So without wasting any more time, I would like to invite our first speaker of the day to provide opening remarks. He is the Chief Scientist at Academia 2063. Please welcome Professor Christian Henning.
Yes, thank you very much, Lai, and also a warm welcome from my side. I'm joining you here this time, not from Kigali, but from Kiel. It's a small city in Germany. And I'm very happy that we have this, I guess, very interesting interactive exchange with you on this very important topic, which is advancing climate and bioeconomy agenda in Africa for resilient and sustainable agri-food systems. So what we definitely can see is that climate change and also implementation of the bioeconomy are two global mega trends which are providing challenges and also opportunities for all countries around the world, and definitely also for Africa. And of course, one thing which is also obvious is that to deal with these challenges and also to exploit the opportunities from these trends, governance is key. Governance in this case means public policy interventions. And the question is how these policy interventions should look like and should be designed from a perspective of a specific national country, an African country, or also other countries around the world, but here, of course, we concentrate on Africa. And now, to understand this, how these governmental strategies could look like, it is definitely important that we have an interactive exchange between scientific modelers, and this is what has been provided with this most recent art tour, but also between these modelers, scientists, and society experts, which are political practitioners. And I think this is exactly what this webinar is about. And so I think I very much look forward to this exchange. I will take at least 2 or 3 more minutes to give a broader overview what I'm expecting from this event here. But then I will give over to our speakers. So now, if we are talking about these challenges and opportunities, then we basically see, of course, climate change comes in two versions. On the one side, in climate adaptation. So because of climate change, we have weather change, we have temperature change, and especially in Africa, we can expect, and we already observe, that there are many additional constraints. That's one thing, but on the other side, beyond adaptation, we also have to think about mitigation, which is, of course, from the viewpoint of Africa, maybe not the most important point, because Africa, compared to other countries, is not contributing in a very high amount emissions compared to the total world. But on the other side, if we still think about the mitigation, bioenergy might be a particular strategy. And here, this might be, again, an opportunity even for African countries, because they might have comparative advantage in producing bioenergy. Now, in general, bioenergy, this relates already to the bioeconomy. This could be or is definitely one aspect of bioeconomy, but not the only one. And I think that if we take a broader perspective on bioeconomy, not only a resource-based bioeconomy, so basically using resources in a very innovative way for innovative products or innovative production technologies. But if we also see that it is much more about using partly computer and digitalization science to get closer to the natural knowledge. So basically inventing new biotechnologies. If we look on this perspective, then we see a much wider way how bioeconomy can be a pathway for climate adaptation and also for sustainable development in the future. But here, coming back to the governance challenges, it is one thing about how these potentials, how these new biotechnologies can be developed, especially can be developed in the context of Africa and can be developed in the science sector of Africa. I think here are a lot of opportunities, but we still need some governmental support to really use these opportunities. And the second challenge, I think, is once we have this bioeconomy, these new biotechnologies, maybe even especially in combination with digitalization, the question is, how can this be implemented? And here again, implementation, it's an old issue, but this is a new technology, and we can see how this can be best supported by governmental frameworks. So I think along these lines, I will stop here, because we will definitely go into very interesting specific details, and we will have very lively discussions. That's what I hope. And so I very much look forward to this event, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Professor Henning, for those remarks, for setting the context for this discussion. Without further ado, I will invite our first presenter. He is the Director of Operational Support at Academia 2063 and equally one of the co-editors of the 2024 ReSAKSS Annual Trends and Outlook Report. Please welcome Dr. Getao Tadesse.
Okay, thank you, Lai. I'll be briefly presenting. Thank you for everybody for coming and thank you for the opportunity to present a brief overview of the 2024 annual trend and outlook report, which happens. I had the opportunity to be one of the editors. So this it's not moving. I don't know why. Yes, I think Professor Christian has already said about the background, why we are really very much interested on climate change and bioeconomy. But to tell you the brief, some of the background that motivates us to deal with about these topics is we see Academia 2063, as you know, is standing between policy and science. which is not really very challenging position. We stand in between policy and science. So we have to try to accommodate the scientific findings to guide policy action. So what we observe from our previous exercise, from our previous policy engagement, that there many people, including policymakers, they clearly understand the urgency of climate action, which is somehow a good trend observation that we see across the world, but also in Africa as well. And we see also there is a clear understanding of the role of bioeconomy, especially by scholars and researchers, not yet into the policy area, but among scholars and researchers, there is a strong understanding that bioeconomy can play a tough role for climate action and sustainable development and all those things. And also the other trend that we observe is there is a good political commitment to climate action, at least since the Paris Agreement. So many of the African countries, almost all African countries, they have developed the nationally determined contribution plan, and they submitted for the UNFCCC. And all those indicates, and at continental levels, we have the African Union has developed a climate change and resilience development strategy. And many African countries, they have also national adaptation plans. So this shows that there is a political commitment. But there are also challenges that we observe. And the first one is translating commitments into actions. That's where we are failing. We have a lot of strategies and we have a lot of commitments, but in terms of implementation, we are a little lagging behind. And when it comes to bioeconomy, I think we are not yet convinced, the policymakers are not yet convinced about the bioeconomy, and it was not taken as really a policy agenda. There are good initiatives somewhere, for example, in the East African communities, and in some African countries like Namibia and South Africa, they have developed some strategies, but it's not yet fully impressed at continental and also in many African countries. And also, once they are convinced to embrace bioeconomy, and then we have to also identify areas how to mainstream bioeconomy with the existing strategies. You know, we have the food system transformation agenda, we have the climate change agenda, and we have also trade agendas and all these things. So the other challenge we have is how to really mainstream bioeconomy into those things. And with these backgrounds, then we developed this concept 2024 @OR, and with the objective of just exploring some of the challenges, especially on climate crisis, especially on implementation, and also the opportunities offered by the transition to bioeconomy for mitigating and adapting the adverse impacts of climate change. This was the overall objective of the @OR. And also the purpose was just to provide evidence and actionable recommendation for the ongoing discussion on post-Malabo CAADP agenda. You know that the post-Malabo agenda has been an issue for this year, and then we already developed the African Union has already developed a draft declaration that will be approved next year, early next year in January. So this @OR will be served as an input, and it has been an input for developing the declaration, and it also serves as an input for the implementation and also domestication of the Kampala declarations that will be approved by next year, hopefully. And with that objective, then the @OR covers several topics. The first one is about tracking about agricultural emissions and climate risk. I mean, in terms of methane, methane is one of the greenhouse gas emission, which is very common in agriculture. And then one of the chapter in the @OR has tried to track the methane across African countries. And also we try to map the risks associated with climate change in terms of temperature and rainfall variations and other health risks associated with climate. And the other chapters, they deal with the impacts of climate change, both at macro level, macroeconomic level, and micro levels, and also on food system transformation and the impact of climate change on agriculture. I think Tom will present about it, and also how climate change affects household vulnerabilities, with some examples from Senegal and Rwanda. And we do also have chapters on climate action, especially on the effectiveness of some of the adaptation actions that have been implemented by different African countries, including like irrigations, climate smart agriculture practices, and all these things. And one of the chapters explored how effective are they and what are the necessary conditions for this action to be scale up and effective. And we have also a chapter on energy transition and innovative climate finance. These are critical climate actions that are required to be scaled up and also expanded, so that we spend quite some time in the report. And the other part is on the bioeconomy. In the bioeconomy, we looked at how bioeconomy can contribute, especially insect farming can contribute for nutrition, and also how bioeconomy can open up opportunity for business in Africa. I mean, in terms of agro-processing and employment generations, and given the expanding free trade areas in Africa, how bioeconomy can be really exploited for those opportunities. And also we documented some of the country experiences from Africa, Asia, Latin America, and how really countries are dealing with bioeconomy. We have chapters on that. And finally, we do have on policy actions, like how to converge climate bioeconomy agenda with bioeconomy, climate with bioeconomy. And also we deal a little, quite sometime, some chapters on how to integrate these two topics on the post-Balawa agenda. An important area that we covered, that was covered in the report, is the nexus between bioeconomy and climate change. I mean, these are some of the thoughts that have been discussed during the presentation and also within the report. I mean, bioeconomy, for those who are beginners like me on bioeconomy, is just about biodiversity, bioproduct, and biotechnology. And climate change, as you know, is more about mitigation and adaptation. So then how really you can use bioeconomy both for mitigation and adaptation? For example, for mitigation, as Professor Christian said, it helps for biofuels and sustainable farming, and also waste valorizations and circular economy. These are some of the bioeconomy concepts that can contribute for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in Africa. And in terms of adaptation, I mean, resilient agriculture, because with the adoption of bioeconomy practices, then we can build resilient agriculture and ecosystem restoration, sustainable livelihoods because of bioproducts. These bioproducts serve as a way of diversifying livelihood in Africa through agro-industrializations and all these things. And also resilient infrastructure, because of use of some bio products, we can build a resilient infrastructure. So these are some of the thoughts that have been mentioned in the report. The key policy recommendations that were discussed, I mean, that comes out from the reports are, the first one is on accelerating the implementation of climate commitments. As I said, there are a lot of commitments here and there. And then I think countries and governments, both at regional, continental, and country levels, has to focus on accelerating the implementation. And more specifically, they have to think of targeting of climate action interventions across commodities, households, and geographies. The studies clearly show that the impact of climate change is different across commodities and across households and even across geographies. So then governments have to really properly target interventions to make them more effective. And also prioritization of adaptation actions. I mean, the national adaptation plans for African countries, they list a lot of interventions. I mean, they require a lot of finance, a lot of efforts, capacity, and all these things. Those practically may not be possible, but I think country has to engage on prioritization of key resilient or adaptation actions. That comes out of it. And also there is a need for converging climate action and bioeconomy, which has been said. And the other recommendations that comes out is mainstreaming bioeconomy in the African agri-food system transformation. Here is very critical to impress bioeconomy, and because of its advantage for climate actions, and also for agro-industrialization. Agro-industrialization is a key drivers for African overall economic development, and bioeconomy can create also opportunity for those things. And also we have to leverage climate finance for bioeconomy. There are a lot of climate finance initiatives here and there, and we have to utilize or leverage those things for developing the bioeconomy sector. But more critically important is we have to work on data and analytics. We don't have really that much strong data on the importance of bioeconomy and how to integrate with the existing systems and all this. That's one of the outcome we realized from our review of literatures. And unless we have data, we cannot convince the policymakers. So these are some of the key recommendations that comes out of the report. And I'm happy to receive some comments and suggestions, and hopefully the next speakers will present the details of some of the chapters. Thank you. Over to you, Lai.
Thank you so much, Dr. Getal Tadesse, for that presentation. And over the course of this meeting, we will be getting more into the findings and the policy recommendations this report. So our next speaker was unable to join us in person. He is the author of Chapter 6 on the impact of climate change on agriculture. And the presentation you are about to watch was prepared under the framework of the ReSAKSS annual conference where we launched the report. But since he was unable to join us for this webinar, he thought it would be great for us to look at what he put together for the ReSAKSS conference. So let's watch the presentation from Senior Research Fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute, Dr. Tim Thomas.
Thanks for inviting me to speak at this conference. I'm very sorry I wasn't able to travel to speak in person, but I hope this video presentation will be a good substitute. I have a lot to cover in this quick presentation, and this on the screen is the brief outline of what I hope to cover, going from the beginning with the current climate, working through climate models, crop models, bioeconomic models, and then concluding. This just shows how diverse the climate of Africa is. The slide on the left is the annual rainfall for Africa, and the slide on the right is the mean daily maximum temperature. And these are for the current climate, basically taking data from more or less the last 30 years. These slides show changes that have already taken place in the climate. And it's done by running regressions on each location. We see that a lot of places haven't had a particularly strong rainfall trend, which are the white areas in the left slide, though we see considerable drying around DRC and the regions surrounding that. But on the right map, we see areas of considerable warming over the last 43 years. These are the 5 climate models that we use in the study. They're from ISIMIP3B, which feeds into the IPCC report. And what you see, the first thing I want you to notice, the top line is annual rainfall, and the bottom line is mean daily maximum temperature. I want you to note that there's a lot of diversity among the models. The models are not in agreement as a whole. We see, for example, IPSL model is a very wet model with the greens and blues. And we see the GFDL, for example, being very dry with the oranges and browns. And so what you would also notice if you stare at this long enough is you can pick up some trends where the models are in agreement about locations. What this shows is the result of our crop model for rain-fed maize. And the red are areas of loss and the green are areas of gain. And so you can see that most of Africa that grows maize is in the orange or red areas, which show losses or projected losses from 2005 through 2050. You'll see, if you look carefully enough, you'll see some areas of green. For example, the highlands of Ethiopia and other highlands throughout Africa, parts of Kenya, Rwanda, Lesotho. These have areas generally of gain as a result of warmer temperatures. So even though Africa shows on average, or in the median value, not technically on average, an 11% yield loss from climate change, you'll note that the rest of the world is projected to have a 12.5% yield loss. And so what if you think about this, what that means is that actually Africa, under climate change, has a comparative advantage with maize compared to the rest of the world. Now, when we put the climate and the water models and the crop models into a global bioeconomic model called impact, we can project out what we expect to happen in the future. And these are the top 10 crops for Africa based on total cultivated area. And you'll see here that maize is projected to yield expand by 23.4% between 2020 and 2050. Now, it would expand even more if there weren't climate change. However, even under climate change, we expect expansion. We also see, we expect the harvested area in Africa to continue growing by around 19%, and the combined expansion of yield and increase in harvested area leads to a production increase of almost 50% between 2020 and 2050. And this table, of course, has the same projected results for all the other crops, but we don't have time to delve too deeply into these results. They're all in the chapter. So I wanted to close with a final reflection on some of the points that I want you to take away. First of all, a lot of people suggest that Africa is going to have a very hard time with maize because climate change is going to scale back the yields a bit. But as you saw from the models, we expect overall with productivity increases based on better seeds and better farming practices, we expect maize yields to continue to grow. So don't give up on maize. Africa does seem to have a slight comparative advantage under climate change with maize. And maize could be an effective crop for Africa. And especially since it's the leading crop now and a very popular crop, Africa should definitely not move strongly away from maize. However, we didn't make a big point of this, but the same modeling shows fairly large losses for wheat and potatoes. And not only losses for wheat and potatoes, it's relative to the rest of the world, which is gaining in yields on wheat and potatoes. So I expect that in the next 30 years, a lot of places that grow wheat in Africa might scale back. This is not to say that the whole continent is bad for wheat. You saw how diverse or how heterogeneous the climate is in Africa. And there are places that will be still for years and years to come under climate change, still be very good for wheat and potatoes, but other areas, however, will be poor. There are hot spots regarding climate change. What I consider a hot spot is an area that's locally, where a crop is locally very important and where climate change will have a large and negative shock to cut yields back. And the advantage of this very detailed mapping approach is that it helps policymakers to focus interventions on these hotspots. Rather than taking a scattered approach, special care can be taken to focus on these particular areas. One thing we didn't cover in this study, and in part because we find that it's understudied by the research community, is the impact, excuse me, of increases in climate variability on yields and on food insecurity and on poverty and on ag GDP. And so more studies need to be done. We expect that climate will become more variable. We expect that it is becoming more variable, and that you're already seeing that. We expect that the intensity of climate events, of rainfall in particular, will increase. And we expect that the climate shocks, the frequency of climate shocks, drought, heat waves, floods, we expect that they might increase in frequency. And so more study needs to be done about the depth of these effects and what can be done to increase the resilience of these climate shocks. And finally, a point I didn't make very carefully, but it's embedded in the tables and in the research. CO2 fertilization can lead to 10 to 20% yield boost to some crops, not the C4 crops, which are maize and sorghum and millet and sugarcane and teff, but all the other crops pretty much are C3 crops, like potatoes and soybean and wheat and rice and barley and as I said, all the other crops. And it's still somewhat controversial in that many researchers don't believe that we'll see the CO2 fertilization effect, while others are adamant that experiments have clearly shown that it is going to be a serious and an important effect. So that's all I have, except I did want to acknowledge that the CGIAR Foresight Initiative enabled me through funding my time to work on this presentation and the chapter. Thank you very much.
And now on to our final presentation for the session. I would like to invite the co-author of Chapter 11 on a just energy transition, Dr. Ismail Kenes, to make his presentation on the research findings. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The presentation will be on just energy transition, maybe looking at the challenges and pathways for low carbon emissions in Africa. Let's start with the key challenges and mainly focusing on sub-Saharan Africa. Three main challenges. First of all, the low access to modern forms of energy. What I mean by modern forms of energy, it's mainly electricity, gas, bottled gas or natural gas. The second key challenge is the heavy reliance on bioenergy. I have to specify non-sustainable bioenergy, such as firewood, charcoal, and also agriculture residues. And the third key challenge is the urban-rural divide. And of course, all these has quite an important impact on deforestation and greenhouse gas emissions, impact on health, for example, from cooking, women and children, which are disproportionately affected. And also there is an impact due to land use change. For instance, 30% of new diseases are a result of land use change. This is according to FAO. And of course, the third point is as an impact is the social and economic development inequality due basically to the urban-rural divide. What we mean by just energy transition, in fact, just energy transition is not only shifting from fossil fuels to low carbon pathways, including renewable, of course, among the low carbon pathways. Of course, this is the shift from non-sustainable fossil fuels to low carbon pathways is important, but it's not only that. The just transition in the energy sector is much more than that, and it will encompass the social justice, economic development, environmental sustainability, and also strengthening the place of Africa, both in the global economy and the global governance. Then it's not only the technical aspect of moving from, say, in fossil fuels for energy generation to low carbon pathways, but including all the social and economic dimension. Just to illustrate what I have said before regarding the urban-rural divide and access in SSA, Sub-Saharan Africa. So a couple of striking figures and numbers. More than 80%, about say 500 million people in rural areas are still living without access to electricity. This is in 2021, but 2024, the figure has barely changed. The second striking figure is clean cooking fuels and technologies. Approximately 1 billion people still do not have access to, say, clean cooking fuels, and this number may increase by 2030. Illustrating the urban-rural divide, a couple of figures for urban areas and rural areas. Basically, in urban areas, approximately say 85% of people do have access to clean cooking fuels. In rural areas, this number of having access to clean cooking fuels, such as electricity, bottled gas, is between 27 to 35 approximately. The average is 30%. Then we can see the big divide, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, between urban and rural, and the impact of this big divide on poverty issue. Now, a major point is how the transitioning to low carbon pathways, including renewables, of course, by sustainable bioenergy, and financing. If we consider the whole of Africa, that the whole of Africa, not only sub-Saharan Africa, the cost of transitioning, that's one scenario by the International Energy Agency. There are other scenarios. It's about approximately $200 billion, which will be needed annually by 2030. At the moment, currently the clean energy spending, that's in 2022, even 2024, the figure has slightly increased. In 2022, we are sure about this figure. It's only $25 billion have been spent on clean energy solution, which is only 2% of the global total. And on the right-hand side, you have the breakdown of this investment requested to transitioning to low carbon pathways. It includes fossil fuels are included, renewables, bioenergy is among renewables, grid access, all issues about efficiency, for instance, using improved cook stuff. Then we can see the big gap between what is requested, 200 billion, and what has been spent, 25 billion, then a gap of 175 billion. Then the pathways for energy transitioning in sub-Saharan Africa, three main pathways. There's the three main, there are other also pathways, but these are the three main pathways. First of all is shifting from inefficient biomass for household to modern energy services, such as bottled gas, electricity. That's a figure which has been produced recently by ECOWAS. If we consider the cumulative savings of charcoal in urban areas in ECOWAS countries, the 15 countries, between 2021 and 2050, then the savings could reach 160 million ton oil equivalent. If we compare with the scenario business as usual, if we translate say 160 million ton in wood, it could be 1 billion ton of firewood, which could be saved between 21 and 2050 if different say pathways are adopted regarding charcoal. And on the right-hand side, we can see the impact of say the deforestation. This is for Ivory Coast. The second type of pathways of transitioning, say from inefficient say, energy system to more sustainable energy system is renewables and electricity access. And this includes the full menu, solar home systems at the level of households, mini grid, for instance, villages, and also considering renewables at a level of, say, cities such as utility scale power plants. And the third, sorry, that's a phone. A third component of the pathways, it's not only renewables, but particularly in Africa, natural gas and LPG is the liquefied petroleum gas, it's bottled gas, should be also part of the solution. If you look at the current picture, the energy landscape in Africa, production of natural gas, LPG, is continuing. It's even increasing in sub-Saharan Africa. There are new projects which are being developed, and these projects have an important role in energy access. They also have an important role in the industrialization of the continent, and also regarding the integration. For instance, in West Africa, there is the West Africa gas pipeline, which is linking several countries in West Africa. Then the shift, the transitioning shouldn't be only limited, say, to renewables or shifting from inefficient biomass to more sustainable biomass, but also natural gas and LPG to some extent. I insist, to some extent, should be part of the solution. Now, why financing is crucial? For a simple reason: without external financial support and access to credit, most clean projects are not economically viable. This is because of the lack of customers' affordability. And on the right-hand side, there is a graph which is by the International Energy Agency regarding the affordability. If people don't have the money, they don't have the financial means, say, to transition, to move from inefficient options to more efficient options, then this will not happen. Then financing is crucial. The big issue, how to finance and who should pay. And here there is the historical responsibility of developing countries. One of the key drivers of transitioning is greenhouse gas emission, and we do know that Africa's share in greenhouse gas emission is very low, between 3, I put the figure of 4%, but it's between 3 to 4%. That's our calculation of the IPCC, then the panel on climate change. The second issue in transitioning, in many African countries, there might be some assets which will be stranded. For instance, all the fossil fuels, resources, the associated infrastructure to these fossil fuels, with a rapid, say, shift to renewables, all these assets may be stranded, and it's the figure is quite high in terms of trillions. And who should pay for this financing stranded? And in here we do have the historical responsibility of developing countries, which are responsible for the major share of greenhouse gas emissions since the Industrial Revolution. And the third point, this will be my final point, in transitioning, we should consider, in transitioning, say, from fossil fuels to renewable solution, including bioenergy, of course, it's quite important to build the value chain. It means from the say, the resources, the solar, wind, to industry. And this is crucial for social, for economic development, for employment, and for, say, the place of Africa in the global economy. Thank you very, very much. That's my final word.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kenneth, for your presentation. This brings us to the end of the presentations, and we are now moving to the moderated panel discussion. Our moderator is a very well-known friend of Academia 2063, contributor to this report, visiting researcher at Imperial College London, and member of the Malabo Montpellier panel, Dr. Debisi Araba. We are around 10 minutes behind time. We planned, let's take about 30 to 35 minutes for the panel, and then we'll have a few minutes after that for the Q&A segment. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Patake. Good afternoon or greetings, everyone, wherever you are following us. It is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished panel members. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Yuba Sokuna. Amongst other things great things that he's doing and has done, he was the former vice chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. We also have Dr. Aisha Nakito, scientist and program lead at Academia 2063 for the Malabo Montpellier panel. We also have Dr. Suresh Babu, Senior Research Fellow, Head of Capacity Strengthening at the International Food Policy Research Institute, IFPRI, member of the CGIAR, the Global Agriculture Consortium. And finally, we have Dr. Beatrice Murithi, Research Scientist at the International Center of Insect Physiology and Ecology, ICIPE, in Nairobi, Kenya. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to speak with you. I think, Dr. Nakito, perhaps we begin with you because we've heard a lot about the Malabo, post-Malabo process, of course, the report that was launched last month in Morocco. Now, doing a deeper dive on this, based on your helicopter view of what we're doing here, and you have been involved in the process to integrate the bioeconomy ambitions into this post-Malabo CADA process. Where do you think we're making progress, and what do you think we need to keep an eye out for that we don't repeat mistakes or any sort of oversights from the previous version of the Malabo Declaration as we go into a post-Malabo process? What new things should we be looking for as we want to integrate bioeconomy into this process?
Thank you very much, Dr. Debisi. Maybe what I can say is that we've had different dialogues and different platforms where we've been discussing the bioeconomy development in Africa. And what has been coming out is that there is still a little bit of confusion or misunderstanding on what a bioeconomy really means, especially in the political space. So I think it's really important that we focus on having more programs that focus on capacity building to enlighten the stakeholders on what the bioeconomy is, its principles, practices, potential benefits, especially in climate change mitigation, improving food security, and also biodiversity conservation, where we also have economic growth involving bioproduct development, among others. So I think this would pave way to provide a stronger foundation on developing a strong regional bioeconomy framework. And but it also requires engaging stakeholders in identifying priorities and concerns regarding this bioeconomy development, and also assessing any potential strengths and gaps in initiatives that have already been implemented. That could be gaps in policies, institutions, technologies, or bioresources that are critical in growth of a bioeconomy. So following these findings that would have come out from the stakeholder engagement and also assessments of the initiatives on the ground, then we can compare with the post-Malabo CADIP strategy and action plan for 2026 to 2035. And you would find that to achieve some of the objectives in this action plan would require a bioeconomy approach. For example, if you look at objectives targeting agro-industrialization and sustainable food production, building resilient agri-food systems, and also ensuring food and nutritional security, you'd find that having a bioeconomy approach would be critical in this kind of in getting the targets for these objectives. Although we can't say that nothing has been done already. There are already policies, for example, for achieving sustainable food production. But these policies mainly target, for example, one sector, which is like say agriculture. But there's need for a cross-sectoral engagement and also multiple stakeholders to help in developing specific bioeconomy strategies or activities and also investments. So I can say that also there is need to invest more and promote research in bioeconomy related technologies and initiatives, and to build industries because agro-industrialization is one of the objectives in post-Cardiff agenda. So if we want to also grow in terms of industries, we can look at how can we increase industries that produce bioproducts. So that means governments also have to have interventions like tax breaks for such enterprises, right? But it goes without saying that we need to also collaborate as African countries to share best practices and also maybe technologies that have worked well. And I think this can be a good approach towards the next steps in the post-Cardiff marathon.
Right. No, thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Babu, I want to follow on from what Dr. Nakito just said. You know, she talked about this multi-stakeholder approach. Now, one of the things that we should be doing is taking best practice and knowledge from around the world. In your contribution to the report that was launched last month, you researched the bioeconomy development in Asia and Latin America using Thailand and Brazil as exemplars. Now, can you share some insights from your research? What areas of the economy are these countries focusing on? And what policies and institutional setups stand out for you that can be applicable or useful to African economies as they develop this new process within the post-Malabo framework? Dr. Babu? Oh, you're muted.
I'm muted, yeah. Yeah,
It happens.
thank you,
Okay.
Dr. Debisi Araba. Thank you so much for inviting me for this discussion, and also thanks for the opportunity to also contribute to the report, particularly from the perspective of what is happening in Latin America, what is happening in Asia. I've been a bit involved in the process in those two continents as well, in addition to particularly in Africa as well, so that we could bring the lessons learned and also comparative, South-South kind of learning was possible with this chapter and the contribution to the chapter. First of all, I want to broadly think about both in the context of Thailand and Brazil. They are a bit advanced even compared to other Asian and Latin American countries. And in that context, they are very good examples. They've started thinking about bioeconomy and integration of bioeconomy into the main economic development process. Now more and more thinking about bioeconomy contribution to the climate change, both in the context of mitigation and adaptation. So from that perspective, the choice of those two economies and the countries are very valuable and relatable as well. But in the context of what we did in the chapter, we basically looked at the national policy process in terms of how does bioeconomy policy process take place in these two countries, and how we can learn from that. That's one level of understanding the policy process. And Professor Henning talked about this governance as a whole that relates to this policy mechanism in which you translate your broader economic goal into specific sectoral policies. And that's something that we want to keep in mind. In that context, if you take Thailand, for example, you stop me anytime because I can go on and on. Thailand, for example, brought the National Biotechnology Policy Framework and also followed it up with biocircular green economy model that they've been using for some time. And those two derived this action plan for their bioeconomic policy process in terms of setting the agenda, evidence-based policy analysis, bringing the priorities upfront, following up with investment plan, and then of course implement the activities and evaluate them. So they kind of emerged now as a bio hub of Asia broadly. And Asian countries are learning from the examples of Thailand. That's broad kind of thing. But what Thailand has also done is to bring the government sector along with the private sector. Actually, private sector is the one that drives pretty much the bioeconomy because they invest and they look for the policy support from the government. And of course, the private sector is tightly linked with the academic and research institutions. That needs to be understood. And I work closely with Kesasat University, which is the leading agricultural university in Thailand, in which I am an adjunct professor there. That gives me an insight into how the industry and the agricultural university are tightly connected in terms of the research coming from the university being translated into something beneficial to the society. And it pretty much applies to the bioeconomy development as well. But in addition to that, civil society organizations are playing their own role in terms of taking the knowledge to the final end users, be it on the consumer side or on the producer side in the context of farmers and foresters and smallholders and so on. And they are also involved in the development along with the international agencies, of course, that are operating in Asian context, ASEAN, to give an example, our intergovernmental agencies particularly have been very useful for Thailand development of biotechnology and bioeconomy as a whole. But of course, one of the crops, if I mention in Thailand, is sugarcane, and that has become a source of biofuel and bioenergy for them. But one success story for Thailand, as I observe, both from inside as well as from outside, is this multi-stakeholder consultation. They continuously consult, engage with wide range of stakeholders including farmers and processors of raw materials, and bring the investors to look at what is possible and to achieve this multi-dimensional goal of achieving food security on the one hand, the biofuel goals, and also climate change goals as well. That's Thailand. Of course, quickly on the Brazil, it is an interesting case because Brazil started bioeconomy under the fuel crisis. At some point in the early 80s, they already faced the fuel crisis because of foreign exchange depletion, and they were looking at what are the ways in which they can convert their bio sources into fuel, because importing fossil fuel was an impossible thing at that time. It was very tough. So it was a kind of a crisis-driven bioeconomy development in Brazil, if you look at the history of it. But of course, they continue to evolve in terms of the strategy. The latest one is 2024 National Bioeconomy Strategy, which kind of outlines how the combination of bioeconomy, biotechnology practices, biodiversity, and the just transition Professor Ismail talked about, and of course, how do they contribute to the forestry sector? Preserving the forest Amazon forest is an important thing for them in terms of both using it and preserving it. And their bioeconomy strategy becomes very useful tool for them. And Brazil also has developed strategic partnership with alliances with other countries, particularly. A team of scientists always are sent. I just give an example, right? They're sent to Europe and North America for learning new technologies, learning new techniques and innovations, and they go back and implement it. And Embrapa, for example, is the leading national agricultural research organization, particularly for the commercial sector, although they contribute to some extent to the smallholder sector as well. But they are the driving force behind the research and innovation that drives the bioeconomy from the research perspective. But then the government mechanisms guiding this process of how do we convert the bioproduction system into an economic development pathway is also guided by the economic policies of the country as well. One good example on that is this ethanol production system, how sugarcane economy has highly contributed in a decentralized manner to the ethanol production, and the share of ethanol in the transportation industry, for example, is a huge example for us to follow, even for other Asian countries as well. But in this context, this sectoral approaches in the context of food, water, energy nexus plays a very important role in Brazilian's bioeconomy development. So let me stop here. Maybe we can come back to other questions, Dr.
Thank you very much, Dr. Babu. I think that was a comprehensive overview of what's going on in Latin America, Asia, and how they are thinking through the bioeconomy and what's necessitating, or at least pushing them in that direction. Now, we've talked about fuel. Let's perhaps switch gears slightly, looking at the impact of climate change on agriculture and food systems. I would like to introduce Professor Delia Grace Randolph. Professor Randolph is a professor of food safety systems at the Natural Resources Institute at the University of Greenwich in the United Kingdom. Professor Randolph, you co-authored Chapter 5 of the report, looking at climate risks and vulnerabilities in African agri-food systems. What are the more interesting findings? Perhaps, if anything, was counterfactual, but interesting findings from your research regarding where the continent of Africa sits at this point in time in respect to the risks posed by climate change and the vulnerabilities of agri-food systems across the continent.
Sure, and again, thank you very much for inviting me to come along and to talk to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So myself and my two co-authors looked at three different areas, two sets of risks: the environmental risks of climate change and the health risks of climate change. And then thirdly, household vulnerability. Some of the most important findings, well, one of my co-authors presents a series of new maps which show for the first time, are showing the anomalies in temperature, precipitation and vegetation of the last year of 2023 compared to the 20 years that preceded. The maps are in the report for everyone to look at. They're a little hard to describe, but they give a complex and detailed picture of impacts across the continent with no region untouched. For example, in 2023, there were sharp decreases in rainfall in several parts of Western and Southern Africa, while in some other areas there was excessive precipitation. And the study also uncovered a huge area of vegetation anomalies, starting in the Horn of Africa and going westwards into West Africa. That was some of the highlights from the environmental risks. From the health, which was the part I was more specifically working on, we found that of all the countries in the world at different health risks from climate change, nearly 2/3 of them, 63% of them, in fact, are in Africa, showing clearly that Africa is one of the areas at highest health from climate change risk. And what is this risk? Well, between 2030 and 2050, climate change is predicted to cause 1 million extra deaths every year in Africa south of the Sahara. And most of this will be due to vector-borne diseases, followed by diarrheal diseases and undernutrition. Over the same time, climate change will contribute to around 100 extreme events each year. By extreme events, we mean things like flooding or droughts, which can affect up to tens of millions. We've seen that last year with droughts. And those will have multiple and complex effects on health, as well as, of course, hunger, livelihood, and many other aspects. Finally, I'd just like to quickly highlight the third part of the chapter, which looks at the Household Vulnerability Index, which is a composite index summarizing three factors: exposure to climate change events, how sensitive households are to these events, and thirdly, how much capacity they have access with to be resilient towards events. Putting all these together allows a really detailed mapping at district level or even lower of countries, and this allows us to identify the hotspots which are most vulnerable to climate change, and this can help in targeting benchmarking and also in measuring progress. As well as this, it helps show us some policy options. For example, in Senegal, this climate change vulnerability index shows that the main driver of the household vulnerability is actually low agricultural performance, and that targeting low agricultural performance is the best way to reduce the vulnerability and increase resilience. So that was in a very short summary the highlights of the chapter which I was leading, and I hope that you will have a chance to go and have a look at it and do some justice to the maps which we present. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Randolph. And again, that's an invitation for our participants to take a deeper dive into the report, the main report, to get a sense of all the intellectual heft that's gone into condensing their research and their findings and insights on the wider bioeconomy theme, but also specifically as it relates to the impact of climate change on food systems and agriculture. Thank you. Dr. Muriithi, when we talk about agriculture, we usually refer to crops, livestock, fishery, but I think there's now room, and I think people are warming up to the idea of diversifying our production systems, but also diversifying what comes as an input. Now, you are a leading researcher at ICIPE, the International Center of Insect Physiology and Ecology. A nutrition-sensitive circular bioeconomy for food systems transformation was one of the chapters in the recent report. From your work and the work at ICIPE, the work your colleagues do at ICIPE, can you share with us the role insects can play or are already playing in the nutrition and agribusiness diversification or agribusiness conversation in Africa? And also, what are the associated behavioral and policy challenges that you are encountering in making this shift? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. On behalf of myself and my organization, we are very grateful for inviting us to come and share our insights on insect science. And I must say that Chapter 8 outlines and aligns very well with what we do. But just to answer your first question on the role of insect nutrition and of the role of insects in nutrition and agribusiness, I want to look at the role of insect in two ways. And to start with, I want to look at insects as a contributor to crop production. If we look at the natural insects, for instance, the pollinators, we see from our research that 75% of the crops that we consume and which are nutrients dense depends on insect for pollination. So it's very crucial for us to conserve insects, the pollinators, as these produce micronutrients that are very key for addressing the malnutrition challenges in Africa. The second role of insect, which is very well elaborated in Chapter 8 of the actual report, is the insect farming. And we ask ourselves, why do we need to do insect farming? There are many angles of insect, and the first one is the contribution in terms of edible insects. In Africa, we have more than 500 species of edible insect. And we all know that from our research that insect farming requires very little land, water, and feed compared to the conventional meat production, and therefore a very cheap and easy alternative for protein that is essential for nutrition. The other big aspect that elaborated also in this chapter is the contribution of insects in feed, waste management. For instance, we have the black soldier fly, we have the mealworms. In recycling the waste, organic waste, as we see the per capita generation of municipal solid waste worldwide continue to increase, estimated actually between 2016 and 2050 to increase by 68%. So definitely we need something to address the waste management in a more effective way, and also to reduce carbon emissions and others. And we are happy, very recently we have also discovered that mealworms can also consume plastic waste, which is a breakthrough that currently we have a lot of discussion around that. Of course, the other aspect of insect is the high demand for bio fertilizer. The insect farming serves as a circular economy in that it helps in waste management. It produces biofertilizer, and we're expecting that there will be significant rise of biofertilizer in about fourfolds by 2030. And of course, we know because of the disruptions of political disruptions that brings input and output market supply disruptions. So insect remains for Africa a very potential use for production of fertilizer. The other thing, of course, is the production of insect food. As I said in the beginning, this provides middle income countries, and also low income households with alternative sources of food. Maybe to go to the policy challenges. Of course, there are potential behavioral challenges where we need to create more awareness among the stakeholders along those value chains, so that first of all, we enhance a proper waste segregation that we can be able to use, and as well to make aware people about insect-based products. We see a bit of resistance where traditionally insects are not used as food. People resisting to, accept the insect. So there is need, of course, to do more sensitization, more awareness creation, and also segregation of the waste, so that this waste can also effectively be used for, production of biofertilizer and other products. The other policy challenges we see is lack of harmonizations of standards, that can allow us to have a continental level or continental-wide standards collaboration. But there is a breakthrough in the recent past. We have one policy standards between Kenya, Tanzania, Ethiopia, and Rwanda, and in collaboration with the African Standardization Organization at AU, where we are trying to develop a continental-wide standard to facilitate this kind of intertrade between countries.
Right.
And last but not least is also the need to invest in mechanization of insect industry, so that we can have huge volumes that are required to produce, tons of insect products that can easily be integrated into other markets, like the processors for animal feed. So if we don't have the volumes, then we are not effectively being able to even speak about the policy issues around that. So I think I'll stop there for the purposes of time. But I can talk so much about the importance of insects and the role of insect in nutrition, and as well as creation of job, income, and entrepreneurship. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Marithi, and thank you for the excellent work you and your colleagues are doing at ISIPE in moving this agenda forward. Now, Professor Sokona, I had deliberately reserved your intervention last because I wanted you to hear what everybody else was saying and the presentations. Now, from where you sit and from your background, you've engaged at the highest levels of diplomacy in moving the needle forward. Africa, we've heard, Africa contributes less than 4% to global greenhouse gases, but Africa still needs to industrialize. So here's the conundrum. We still need, at some point, we are going to need to power that industrialization. We have heard a lot about a just energy transition. Now, if Africa is to successfully transition and rely more on greener sources of energy, we have to deal with serious capacity challenges, but also financing, significant quantum of financing, and institutions, the types of institutions that will power this transition. In your view, what are the main priorities that Africa should consider in its quest to realize this much needed energy transition?
Well, this is a big question because we need to have, a webinar on only this issue. It's amazing, and then what all the colleagues have indicated, and there's no possibility then to reach the objectives and then for the well-being of the people without energy. It's critical, it's fundamental. Unfortunately, our policymakers do not see that. We talk about the level of emissions. I think that the problem is not there. The problem is where is the African are consuming 180 kilowatt hour of electricity per head. 180 kilowatt hour of electricity per head. This is a problem. Brazil, 2,500 kilowatt hour per head. France, 7,500. Not mentioning the US, beyond 13,000. In that context, what can you expect with 180 kilowatt hour? Because the issue is not really the emissions. And I think fundamentally, the continent needs to set its own agenda. It does not have an agenda. It's working on the agenda of bilateral, multilaterals, and the private sector in an ad hoc manner, not connected manner. Because if you look at each of the African countries, largely, we do not have an institution dealing with energy. If you have an oil-producing country, you will have Minister of Petroleum. In addition to, the Department of Energy, but the Department of Energy is only managing few projects, renewable project on, by the bilaterals, and then you have a utility. And despite that, and then in that context, I think that we need to set the agenda for the continent. At the same time, we need also to deconstruct the narrative of energy, and particularly on energy access. Smile indicated the problem of affordability because we have not integrated that beyond the access, we need to integrate the appliances that for useful energy. Because if you only limit to access, you will not at all bring energy to serve people. Most of the villages can have electricity, but the only use of electricity they will have is bulbs, lighting, because it's accessible, it's easy. The other use of electricity will not do it because we are not looking at. We just look at this level. And fundamentally, this is the case of agriculture. And then if you look at the whole value chain of agriculture, there's no element when energy is not crucial for completely transforming the agricultural sector and the food system related to agricultural sector. Unfortunately, we are not at all looking at it. We just think
Professor Sokona, can I push back here? We're switching into the Q&A, but we heard from Dr. Babu about the example from Brazil, where they have taken advantage of ethanol from crops. So what is holding us back? I mean, it's not enough for us to say it's not happening. What is holding us back, Professor?
I know the problem of the pro-alcohol of Brazil, because that was after the second oil shock. The Brazilians said to their independence how they can be protected and then from the oil crisis, and just that they invest on their comparative advantage on the pro-alcohol and then bring alcohol on the equation. We do not have that. We have no agenda. That's the problem. And some of the African countries could do it. We are not doing it. That's the problem.
This is what I will just talking about. And then our agenda is driven by bilateral and multilaterals. And that is even when Brazil discovered oil in Brazil, they still continue the pro-alcohol. And then they bring in vehicles, Volkswagen, and then they completely change the engine, and in order to be able to use their alcohol in it. Many countries are producing that. Just to give a figure on there is 60 billion investment in Africa on hydrogen. 60 billion of project investment on hydrogen, 90% for export. It's less than 10% used in the continent, while the countries that are producing are lack of electricity. They have electricity blackout in their country. This is the figure. And that's the point. This is what I'm trying to make. It is that we do have a comparative advantage on many issues, many areas, unless we take that, we say that we need to transform our small-scale farming system. And then we talk about bioenergy, we talk about different others. Back to the 80s, we did a lot of work on those different issues. The technology is accessible, is available, and then is accessible, is in the public domain. There is no, protect on them. But the thing is that, do we have the political will and then to make that changes? This is the kind of thing that I'm just trying to highlight.
I'm seeing a hand up here. Dr. Badian, I will come to you, but first, just following up from what you've said, Professor Sokona, Dr. Nakito, we're talking about leadership here. It's not just about the science. The science, I think we've shared the knowledge. There is a gap between what we know and the actions we are taking or using the evidence to take informed decisions. From your contribution to the report, you looked at the bioeconomy development in Uganda. Could you share some insights? What Uganda is focusing on, and what institutional setups stand out there in Uganda?
Thank you, Dabisi. So Uganda is mainly focusing on clean energy and also agro-processing. So you find that, for example, if you look at clean energy, the country is using about nearly 90% energy coming from biomass and also and waste. So the government is putting in a lot of efforts to try and see that there is sustainable usage of biomass, because even within that 90% approximation, most of the energy is coming from biomass. So there are instances where you have a high demand of biomass versus the supply. And so clean energy is a top priority in the country, as seen in the Uganda Vision 2040 and the National Development Plan 3. In fact, also there are policies already in place to ensure this sustainable usage of energy is what is prioritized in the country. For example, there is the energy policy for Uganda. Then there's also the Biomass Energy Strategy, the Biofuels Act, and also the Uganda Green Growth Development Strategy. But also it's important to note that the country has already drafted a national bioeconomy strategy. Policy. It's not yet passed into a policy, but it's still in draft form. And there are also other interventions that have been put in place. For example, we have the Science, Technology and Innovation Secretariat at the Office of the President, which is providing grants into research that is targeting towards the development of technologies that are looking at having clean energy and also its adoption within the rural communities, because that's where we have a lot of this usage of biomass. And there's also research that is going on, as a colleague mentioned, in ISIPE, where we have conversion of agricultural waste into animal feed and also into biogas. The biogas can then be used into within the food processing industries. It's something that is coming up. So this also fosters some sort of development of a circular bioeconomy. But there's also a strong very many initiatives that are coming up that are fostering collaboration with the private sector to increase the planting of trees. This is still channeling towards ensuring that there's enough biomass that can be used sustainably. So there is an example of the Running Out of Trees initiative, which targets planting 40 million trees, for example. That is 1 tree per Ugandan, looking at the population of 40 million Ugandans. So this is not only helping in ensuring sustainable thermal energy, but also helping in conservation of biodiversity and also mitigating climate change, among others. So also very many research institutions are being funded from development partners, but also the government. For example, we have the government's Research and Innovation Fund, where many public universities are now doing research into animal feed, agro-processing, and also we have institutions like Uganda Industrial Research Institute, which is developing technologies for and also promoting upscale for these technologies in processing of cocoa, shea butter, and also, so that's also a government institute. And it's also having capacity building programs to support young people in starting up enterprises in processing. I know we are running out of time. That's just an overview what's happening.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much,
More is
Dr. Nakito.
I think that's the same chapter I co-authored with Suresh. So there's more in there, more examples in there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Nakito. Again, we invite our distinguished members of the audience to follow the link. I think it's been put in the chat. We can paste it again. Please download the report or read it online. Really useful insights in there, distilled by distinguished scientists from around the world. This issue of leadership in ensuring that we move from just the knowledge of the science, we collate the evidence, and it informs decision making. Is there a gap there? Are there other insights that we can follow up on? Dr. Badian, I would like to invite you to ask your question. Dr. Badian is the chair of Academia 2063. Are you on? Oh, there you are.
Yes, here. Thank you for having me. I joined a little bit late. I was on another call. And I just wanted to chip in on the discussion from my friend, brother, Dr. Sokono Yuba. The challenge that you and DBC have discussed here, why aren't we doing all these things and will prevent us from doing it? From your experience, Dr. Sokono, how far are we as a continent from having a comprehensive approach to energy transition as we do in the agricultural sector? We have the CADEP agenda, shared principles, shared goals, operational modalities, implementations, principles that allow us to act together and do something. You talked about the domination, or at least influence by bilaterals and multilaterals, that has stopped in agriculture since CADEP. The language is more about country ownership and country leadership. Africans are developing and setting the agenda and implementing it and monitoring it and tracking it. How far are we? First of all, do we need something like that in the energy transition sector? How far are we from it? And what will we need to get to that if you do need to have something like that? Thank you very much. And also thank you for taking your time to join us. And same to everybody else who's around here. Back to you, Dr. DBC.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Badian. I'd like to open that question up to our panelists. Does anyone feel so much engaged to respond to this? Like what beyond the evidence, beyond the science, how are we utilizing this to inform action? We had a few years ago the Food System Summit through numerous stakeholder engagements. We had last year the Africa Climate Summit. So there's a lot of multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral, intersectional discussions. Are they helping us put our best foot forward, the national level and continental level? Dr. Babu, you have the floor.
Yeah, I think the question that Dr. Usman Badian raised is a valid question. I was recollecting 15 years ago when, or maybe little more than that, when Dr. Badian took the leadership for the Africa CADAP initiative along with others, and working with NEPAD and AU, and we have come a long way in terms of strategically thinking in the sector. And without that, we would still be talking, going around and around low productivity and so on. Okay. And that process in itself is an African agenda. It came from Africa. It emanated from that. African leaders took the, and I watched in awe with like that process, partly involved in it as well. But that the question that is raised is in the energy sector, for example, or even for going towards bioeconomy, we need that kind of integration of the continental agenda to the national agenda, and of course, sub-regional organization taking the leadership there as well. That would be something which will be definitely needed for not just this energy sector, but the climate change perspective as well. I was in COP last week, and I see this, side events talking about one after another. The topics are so many to deal with, and I was thinking about actually about how about bringing it together and say this is what we want to do, and this is how we need to do. So in that context, of course, national systems have to play an important role. At the national level, how do we integrate the sectors? Even if you take bioeconomy, the agriculture sector, forestry sector, land use sector, and they are connected to climate change as well. That integration of sectoral goals into the larger goals would be a starting point, but that requires, I want to emphasize, my own investment, personal investment in time and in the last 30 years has been building the capacity of the institutions at the national level, so that they can take on this larger goal and then implement it at the country level. So that could be a starting point. And I just want to come in, and that has happened in Brazil, that has happened in Thailand, that's happening in Vietnam right now as we see, and China has gone very far. India is a bit behind, but they are also struggling in some areas. So we see that happening in many countries, and we have done a little bit of effort in Nigeria, working with Agriculture Research Council of Nigeria, for example, how to reform that, how do they get their act together in terms of strategy, policies, and investments, and to think about it. But it is something that to think about. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Dr. Babu. Professor Sokona?
I think I agree with what Babu said. We need to build an institution at national level, and unless we do that, we're not moving. As I said, that we need to, to define our own agenda. We are working on energy transition. This is not our agenda because it has been imposed agenda. It's a northern agenda because they need to move away from the system in which they are operating and then to another energy system. We need to build our system. As I indicated, with 180 kilowatt hour per head, what can you expect to do that? And then where we need to move to make the real transition, we are not looking at it. That is firewood and charcoal. To move away from firewood and charcoal, and that will connect it with the agricultural sector. And it's the agricultural sector also where we need really to make a huge transition, because if you look at the technique, the approach, and everything, it will not bring us to at any level. And I think that those are some of the critical elements, and then we really need to think, unless we set our agenda as the Brazilians said it, and then we need that what energy system for development we need, disregarding any other aspect. And then we need to build institutions at national level. There are where the decisions are taken, national level and local level. Unless we do that, we are not making any progress. We can just have a talk show.
Right.
So, yeah,
Prof, well, we're hoping that in the post-Malabo process, that articulation of the agenda, or the agenda is articulated well in that post-Malabo process. Dr. Henas, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. Just following on what Dr. Yuba Sokona said, and also the question raised by Dr. Usman about how far we are regarding energy transition. In fact, the question is not how far, is what type of pathways have we set? Is it our own pathways, or are we taking pathways set by others? It means moving from bioenergy, moving from fossil fuels to renewable energy. How we are doing that? In fact, there isn't a real strategy as such. I do remember there was a first plan. It was called Lagos Plan of Action on Energy in the 80s. An agenda was set. At the moment, we are not having our agenda. The dependence now, we are saying, let's move from fossil fuels to renewables. Solar, wind are free, but the industry, we are importing equipment. In fact, we are shifting from one type of, say, relative independence to dependence. If we shift from fossil fuels, bioenergy to renewable energy, and we import all the components, we import all the value chain, we are delocating all the jobs. The jobs will go to the north. Then we will be in another type of, say, quite strong dependence. We have to set our agenda and looking at the whole value chain. It means from the resource to the final consumer, and dealing all what I have mentioned in the presentation, the social issues in Africa, the urban-rural divide, and so on. That's what my say main question and advice in thinking, setting up our agenda. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Dr. Kenneth. Again, for the benefit of our distinguished members of the audience, this discussion, the Just Energy Transition, is in Chapter 11 of the report. The link is in the chat. Please click it, distribute it, share it amongst your colleagues, friends, people you agree or disagree with. Again, we're focusing on the broader agenda of what the evidence informs us, and which pathways decision makers will take. So if you are a policymaker, if you're an elected official, if you're a civil society activist, the information informs your knowledge of where we are and what we should be doing. A lot is riding on the post-Malabo process. We are hoping that this mechanism can help the continent have a joined-up thinking on our strategies for food systems, food and agriculture systems transformation. Dr. Badian, I saw a hand up earlier. I'm not sure if it's still up, but we are out of time. Do you want to make another final intervention before we?
No, if you're out of time, I wouldn't say much, but I just said perhaps putting the discussion in the context of energy transition was perhaps a little bit of a distraction. But in the energy sector, I would like us to, at some point, as we reflect, not necessarily here today, but in the future, to go beyond we should and we ought to perhaps this is what we need to do, and then really get that. You know, it's good that Ismail referred to the Lagos Plan of Actions in the 80s. That was an African reaction to a World Bank agenda, accelerated development in Africa. Some people will remember that. And Africa was pushing back, but it was not ready to push back. I don't know exactly what they have in the energy sector, but in the agriculture and economic development sector, it was rushed job and really not of high quality. That has changed now since 2003, when the African countries came together and shaped an own African agenda around agriculture and rural development, economic development, and food security, right? So we need to have something like that. Maybe, or could be something else. But I was just saying, as long as we don't have something like that or similar to it, we will have these agendas imposed from outside. You have not seen a World Bank strategy for agriculture in Africa since the 2000s, early 2000s. You have not seen one from UNDP. You have not seen one from FAO. You have not seen one from the bilaterals. It used to happen all the time. So it would be good for us as a follow-up to the discussion to start thinking about how can we get action, common agenda, and principles for a way of working together and developing a platform, an agenda platform at a continental level that can serve as a guide to our countries as we move on that front, right? not sure it exists, not sure how it could exist, but something like that will put an end to externally driven agendas, but position us to better partner and be part of the global action like we are today on CADEP. We had the Food System Summit, we had the SDGs, but there's a platform within Africa where they can be merged into and contribute to what we do, right? So we will need to have something like that on energy. And as a continuous discussion from our esteemed guests around here, we might want to reflect on how can we get that done. Beyond and outside of the post-Malabo agenda, it deserves to be on its own lane, kind of. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those wise words, Dr. Badian. Dr. Henning, I acknowledge your raised hand. I am going to defer to my boss for today, Dr. Lai Butake. Dr. Butake, I will hand over to you now. If we have time, we truly would appreciate hearing from Dr. Henning.
Yeah, yes, we can.
But
okay,
so all right, Dr. Henning, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Of course, I would also have understood if this would not have been possible. But now, just a quick reaction to Dr. Sokuna. I think I very much agree with his point. And the main thing is at least starting asking what is the reason from the perspective of African states to have this particular energy transition strategy, and now to what is the reason from a perspective of a African state, and just to make the point, if the complete world would be on the state energy-wise as the Africans are in average, would we really see this transformation to this renewable energies? Would we really follow this strategy, yes or no? And so I think this is also a very important perspective. And now there might be still some reasons, for example, if this kind of strategy would be financed, because from a global world perspective, that's what might be positive or whatever, but then there would be a rationale, I think, from the African state to follow this strategy, which would not be there without this finance. So I think this is a very good point, and I think it's also part of what we wanted to do here, to see these are truly governmental issues, and one really has to start there and then get to the right plan and right strategy for African states. So thank you very much for giving me this last chance to make a comment.
Thank you, Dr. Henning, for that intervention. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I will hand over to the Master of Ceremony, Dr. Lai Butake, to take us on. Thank you, Dr. Butake.
Thank you so much, Dr. Araba, for your able and smooth moderation of this session. We could be here until tomorrow. There's so much to unpack here, but of course, we're going to have plenty of occasions to keep talking about the findings of the 16th edition of the ReSAKSS Annual Trends and Outlook Report. And a special thank you to all our panelists and presenters. Now I will invite to summarize for us very briefly the key takeaways from this session, the Director of Knowledge Systems at Academia 2063, Dr. Augustin Wambo-Yamdre. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Lai. Thank you to the panel for the very great submissions. I think we are having a continuation of what we started in Rabat. Hopefully this will continue throughout the year until we release the new ATO for 2025. From the conversation, as always, it's very tough to get to be able to summarize everything that have been said. But I managed to put together 5 points, which to me are very critical. One is that the polycrisis triggered by the climate change is very serious. This is really having a very important a series of implications on our ability to build resilient food systems. How do we reliably supply energy to power the transformation? In terms of our nutrition, in terms of our ability to provide healthcare, I think we are really handicapped. The challenges here, we have to face it. The issues on the table, we can no longer live in denial. The various findings that we hear from the various chapters are suggesting that, yes, we are in big trouble, but the good thing is that there are some good pointers on what can be done. Where has it worked? How in our context we can contextualize it, we can domesticate. How do we take things to scale? That's one thing. The second is, do we, to do something that's going to last for generations to come, we do need to have clarity on the agenda. Do we have an agenda? It looks like we still have a long way to go, whether we're talking about the issue of climate, yes, even climate, or even the issue of energy. How do we address that decisively without riding on somebody's agenda? Do we have something that is really Africa-led, Africa-owned? Yes, there has been a very successful experience here with agriculture. Are we in a position to emulate the same in other sectors? So this is something we have to look into and have a concerted effort and pull in one direction if we want our effort to survive a generation. From the presentation and from the engagement, it's clear that the bioeconomy is offering opportunities. There are some good pointers. We have to get more acquainted to this, which is something kind of alien to quite a few of us. But what we are seeing in terms of opportunities being given by bioeconomy, there is clear indication that yes, if we embrace it, if we do what it takes, learning from the experiences from Latin America, Brazil, and from Asia, we can make it work for us. So Africa is blessed with so many reservoirs of biomasses that we can use to really get something out of bioeconomy. This has been put on the table, but we still have to do some more for the policy actions to take shape, for policymakers to get used to this and see how this can be a sustainable way of addressing the challenges that we're facing. I know the good news is that this conversation is very timely. It's coming at the point where we, as African continent, we're coming together to put a new strategy, which will be launched in January next year, for agri-food system transformation across the continent. We will be successful if we are able to plug in that new strategy, all the key issues that we are raising here. The solutions that have proven to be working, are we able to plug them into the package that African Union will be launching? This is an area where working together, we can help the continent, we can help a lot in moving the needle. So just to conclude, I would like to thank you again and say that this was just a first activity in a series to come. We'll be having several opportunities to engage around this same issue as our effort to continue to promote the very rich report that was put together thanks to your contribution. So on behalf of academia, we are so grateful. We would like to thank you once again. Over to you, Lai.
Thank you so much, Dr. Augustin Wamboyamjo, and a very warm thank you to all our speakers, our presenters, for making the time to join us here today. And thank you too to our participants who have been very patient. We're about 10 minutes above time, but I think it was worth it. This is a continuous series. We launched the report last month in Rabat. This is the first post-launch webinar, and we're going to continue to have a series of conversations to continue unpacking the findings of this report. If you haven't already, please head to the chat, click the link and download the report. It's very rich. Share it with your friends, share it with your colleagues, and stay tuned for more news and updates on events from Academia 2063. Take care. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.